Jim, what's the next part of our model?
It's courage. So courage is not something that you do when you're not afraid. Courage is acting despite being afraid. So if you weren't afraid, you couldn't be courageous. Courage doesn't exist with the absence of fear. So there has to be, some unknown or some challenge or some resistance in order for courage to emerge in a person. And courage comes from knowing the natural laws and being able, through your own experience, like we're saying, your competence and your confidence by doing it, through your own experience, you've proven this law to be so you can be courageous going into the unknown, because at least you know what the fundamental laws are that make things work or not work. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll add to that, and I'll say it's taking rational action in spite of fear. So by understanding the natural laws that surround us, we can look at the situation and decide, is this something I want to do or something I don't want to do? And because we are dealing with conquering irrational fears, not logical fears, we take a rational action and we end up finding out that the outcome may have been not as bad as we initially thought. And to kind of make this sound more understandable, let's use an example. So if we are in an airplane, and we're in a perfectly good airplane, there's nothing wrong with this airplane, and you say to me, hey, Ray, let's jump out of the airplane. It will be great. It will conquer your fear of jumping out of an airplane.
Yep.
Well, a couple things jump out to my mind. Number one is do I have a rational fear or a logical fear or an illogical fear of jumping out of a perfectly good airplane?
Yep.
And I would say that that's a pretty logical fear of jumping out of a perfectly good airplane.
Reasonable, rational fear. By the way, I did it at age 62. And so
I saw your picture on Facebook with it.
Really fresh memory for me. The fear was absolutely rational. We're 13,000 feet above the ground. Without the airplane, I'm 100% dependent on the parachute. And since I've never jumped before, I'm also 100% dependent on the guy on my back who's wearing the parachute. I'm strapped to him.
So in a scenario where we have a perfectly good airplane, one might elect not to jump out of the airplane, and that would be a fine decision to make because there is a chance that the parachute won't open up, right? Now, let's suppose we take the same airplane. This airplane is going down. You know that if you don't jump, you have no chance of survival.
Yeah.
Jumping out of the airplane has all of a sudden become a very rational decision with a parachute.
That's right. Yep.
So being able to understand the natural laws around you, to take rational actions based on the circumstances that you're in, is what we're talking about, and operating in spite of fear that exists, because that's the only way you're going to expand and grow.
It also applies in seemingly benign situations, like being in a meeting and being afraid to speak up, afraid that you'll be judged or criticized by the others. Being in a job interview and being intimidated by the person interviewing you, going into a courtroom and stating your case and defending your cause, against an adversarial attorney or in front of a jury of people that are going to judge you, talking with a policeman when you've been pulled over for a ticket, those sort of things, day-to-day situations where many times people are intimidated into not acting. And it's not because they're not right. It's not because they weren't doing what they should have been doing. It's because they didn't have the courage to speak up. And courage comes from competence built into confidence through practice, and then applied in a threatening situation, which stimulates courage.
A few years
has to fit together. That's why congruence is the next one.
Right, but before we go to that one, a few years ago I had this opportunity to speak to 1,000 people, and this was the first time that I was facing a large group, and it was an interesting experience in that I had prepared a lot for it. So I had the competency of what I was going to talk about, and I was fairly confident. I still had those butterflies feeling inside of me, which is rather irrational fear. I mean, here I am only giving a talk. It wasn't like I was going to war with guns and people shooting bullets at me or anything. But I had this emotional, physiological reaction to being on stage. And I remember when I cut through that fear and went out on stage and talked and let the passion erupt out of me to communicate a message, it dissipated. It went away. And I was in the element of enjoying that moment in time to speak. And I think that as our viewers are watching this and are thinking about how they apply this in their own life, many times when you take that action and go forward with courage, you enter into a new position where you realize it's going to be all right, and you're going to do fine, and you're going to grow and expand from it. And sometimes our imagination might be worse than the reality.
No, almost every time. Yeah, almost every time. And the trouble is when, you know, our mind is so well built. When we go into an unknown situation, our mind fabricates for us potential obstacles. It's part of a problem-solving process. But people abandon the intellect and go into the emotional side only. And that's where they run into trouble. But what's going on is all these fears are simply your mind saying, what if there are wolves? You know, what if the sky is falling? What if you know, you run out of food? What if nobody likes you? Okay, fine. Those are the problems to solve. Do not stop there. Take each one and say, okay, if there are wolves, I'll do this. If there is famine, I'll do this. If people don't like me, I'll do this. Now all of a sudden, because you've thought it through, you're able to be courageous. Whereas previously, you had gone from obstacle, default to the emotion side, which is the feel good at all costs, right? Instead, I'm saying learn to reflect on what's going on, to be objective about it, separated enough that you can think about it wisely, critically. And that's a big thing. My friend Kevin Buck, who's a philosopher, he says, without reflection, there's no true learning. You know, we don't learn when we hear information. We don't learn when we read information. We learn when we reflect on what it means and put it into our knowledge base in the appropriate ways. But without that reflection, there's no learning taking place. You could say, I read 75 books this year. How many did you understand? 75. How many did you apply? Well, but I read 75, right? It's not about what you take in, it's what you process effectively so that it shows up in your life. And then you can be, in our next competence, congruent in the ethical strength of everything that you do and are. In other words, you become a person who's the same person on stage and off stage, same behind the scenes as out front, the same person sitting at the dinner table as you are leading a big meeting in front of powerful people, right?
Absolutely. Congruence with a strong set of ethics that are used to help you formulate how you behave with yourself and with others. And you know, some of the sources that I think can benefit our audience in taking a look at this subject is Aristotle, Ayn Rand, Ralph Waldo Emerson, yep, Napoleon Hill, and of course Buckminster Fulmister. Excuse me.
Fuller. Yeah, easy for you to say. But, you know, and all of this boils down to know what you believe. Know what you believe is right and what you believe is so and not so, and let that be the foundation of your ethical base so that everything you do grows out of that and is consistent with that. So if you hold yourself to certain standards, and by the way, that's the only way you're ever held to standards except as a victim. You know, you could say, well, in a prison you're held to certain standards or they'll hurt you or kill you. Yeah, but that's at the very primitive animal level. We're talking about at the human thought level. If you know what you believe is so, if you know what you believe is right and wrong, and you set that down in writing, and you live your life according to that, you can be an ethical person, a congruent, a moral person. You can do what is right and what will show in your heart that it's right and live a life of meaning. And you're much more likely to be a compassionate, giving, helping person if you do so than if you don't go through that process.
You know, one of my favorite statements to ask somebody or questions is, and remember when you meet somebody on an airplane or you meet somebody and says, you know, so what do you do is always the most common question, right? It's the most boring question for me. I like to ask the question, you know, like, Who are you? What do you stand for? What's important to you? And if you come at interactions with people from that perspective, and you have also thought about the answers to those very valid questions, you will start to operate at a higher level, and you will be much more of a self-reliant individual when you know what it is you stand for, what your backbone is all about. And I think that's an area that all of us need to continuously hold ourselves accountable to, that set of beliefs that we hold true, and live that every day.
Yeah. You know, they say the worst subjects in the world to get onto with other people are politics and religion. And the reason is most people have not thought through what their belief system is. They have not tested their beliefs against criticism to see if it'll hold up. And by the way, if you believe something and someone criticizes it and it doesn't stand up to that criticism, you don't believe it, you just memorized it. Mm-hmm. So your beliefs are the things that you've proven to be so, at least from your point of view. And that point of view needs to be an enlightened point of view, not just a selfish little, I'm going to come to this conclusion point of view. So if a person is going to have a congruent life, it's got to start with them knowing what they think is so, and then structuring their life around that and living that way day to day. And what happens is it handles our next C. It makes you impervious to criticism because you're not worried that someone disagrees with you. You don't mind getting into a discussion of philosophy or religion or politics or whatever it happens to be because you know what you believe. And you can say it and talk about it without getting angry. Someone can disagree with you and you can say, well, I don't see how you came to that conclusion. Or, I see how you came to that conclusion. That makes sense too. You know, it's like Socrates said, life unexamined is not worth living. Well, that's pretty profound, but let's look at it in a little milder context. If you don't hold up your belief system to criticism, to other points of view, other examples, other applications, then you never really know whether it's true. You're just saying, I hope it's true, I hope it's true, I hope it's true, I hope it's true. You know, it's like you believe there's a heaven and then you die and you look around, assuming that's possible. You say, oops, there's not one. Dang, I wish I'd checked out other alternatives before it was too late.
So from what you're saying here, I think our audience can understand that being impervious to criticism is really about being authentic to yourself and trying to find the truth, trying to evaluate and seek the truth and understand reality and perceive it correctly. And that involves critical thinking. That critical thinking goes through this whole process that we're talking about here. And just to give some resources.
Not only critical thinking, but the willingness to be wrong. See, if you're not willing to be wrong, then, again, you don't have a belief. You have a shield. You've got a defense that you're using to protect you from whatever the reality is, because the reality might hurt.
Right.
It's like I told my staff, when I used to have a full-time staff, you know, I outsource now, but I used to have full-time staff for many, many years. And I told them one of the rules when they went to work with me, I said, the truth is not only okay, it is absolutely mandatory. If you ever lie to me, in a small way or a large way, I will consider that a retroactive 2-week notice of termination. And you can leave my office and office building that moment. And a lot of people said, yeah, I get it, you know, the truth's important. I said, no, I am serious as cancer. This will happen. Please don't take it there. So if the truth is bad news, if the truth is you made a mistake, if the truth is you lost money or damaged something, if the truth is you were negligent, okay, I can handle that. But if the truth is you lied, you're gone. Mm-hmm. Because I have to trust what you say to me and make my decisions based on that. So how do you get a society where people tell the truth? Make it okay to tell the truth. Never kill the messenger. Just deal with the circumstance and handle things appropriately. It's like our prison system. What's the prison system based on? Well, it's not based on making things right. It's based on punishing those who were wrong. Well, what a stupid idea that is. Well, no, that'll stop them from... No, it won't. Never has. It just grows the size of the prison system. So we need to rethink a lot of the ways that we're doing things and figure out better ways. Yes, there are people that need to be put in storage to keep everyone else safe from them. But there are an awful lot of people that did something wrong, and we'd be better off having them go make it right again than putting them in storage and feeding them for the rest of their lives.
Well, that's probably a conversation for another day, but it's amazing how many people we have in the American prison system relative to our overall population. But that's totally another conversation.
Yeah.
So coming back to our model here, we've talked about being impervious to criticism. The last piece to this model is all about relationship intelligence. How do you take all of these aspects of being a self-reliant individual and be able to interact and connect with others in a meaningful way that leads to harmony and positive output for everybody involved? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, well that's my company trademark, relationship intelligence, and what it means is being intelligent about
relationships.
Yeah, Bueller, anyone? Relationships. In other words, looking at relationships, a direct connection between people in which value is exchanged, that's the way I define it. Looking at relationships as assets or potentially liabilities. So if your life is filled with interactions with other people, some of those are actually relationships. Many of them are just transactions. You know, hello, how are you? Fine, how are you? That's a transaction. You know, I need to buy this. Here's my money. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for your business. That's a transaction. That's not a relationship. Relationship is where value is exchanged between the people, and it's an ongoing connection. So if your life is filled with relationships, and you tend to be, according to some people, the common denominator of the 5 people you spend the most time with, well, then who you choose to spend your time with most determines the quality or nature of your life at that particular point in time. So we can be more reflective, more objective in backing off and looking at our relationships intelligently and thinking, who do I need more time with? Who do I need to get closer to? Who's missing? What kind of people are not in my life that I really ought to go find? Which people in my life are affecting it negatively, and how could I reduce the percentage of my time that I spend with them, or change the nature of my relationship with them so that it's less impactful, so that we think intelligently about all of this. You know, when you come back to the fundamentals of why does it exist and what makes it work, you're going to come back to the same conclusions, you know, for the perpetuation of life, for the enhancement of life, and self-reliance is at the core. So it all comes full circle because we're actually not going around a circle. We're drilling down to the bedrock that's under everything else. What's the purpose of life? Living fully, giving all that you can give and contribute, and getting all that you can and enjoy and savor, and making that experience better for the world because you were here, instead of simply taking up your space until you get off at the next stop.
Thank you for that. That was great. When we think about how this model, let's just do a quick little recap, make sure everybody was able to take down the key components of this blueprint. We started this conversation today, Jim, as a really honest and truthful conversation about the state of the world today relative to where it once was, at least in terms of the the U.S. country, the country of U.S. And we've gone through this blueprint, which we call the 5CR model. So we started off talking about competency, confidence, courage, congruent with strong ethics, impervious to criticism, and relationship intelligence. We've talked about the importance of being a truth seeker, to understand the world around us so that we can make informed and smart decisions that move us forward so we can expand and experience more of what life has to offer. And we hope, we're not done yet, but we hope everyone who's watching this can appreciate the fact that we're providing a perspective to you that goes right to the core of what the problem is and the prescription and the solution to start making things better. It's something you won't find on the television news network. You won't find it easily accessible because there is a predominant culture in place today that is taking us down one road, And we're trying to show you that there's an avenue, an alternative to take you down another road.